Hello, everybody. Episode 44 of Coco and Dolts. I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Dolph.
And on this episode, we are talking books. Well, book. We're talking book.
Before we talk book, can I talk hockey for a second?
Oh, how is this related? I'm interested. This wasn't in the rehearsal.
Well, I understand we've gotten some listener feedback, and they are upset that we do not actually really talk about hockey, even though it's the very first word in our tagline, Hockey Culture Life.
Right.
So I would like to take this moment to say episode 44, the number 44, is what Hall of Fame defenseman Chris Pronger wore during his tenure with the St. Louis Blues.
There you go, hockey off the top. So now in every episode, we're going to do hockey, culture, and life.
Oh.
In that order.
Well, I didn't mean to start a trend.
Oh, okay. Also, the subject of this week's podcast, or this numbered podcast, is a book by a Canadian. So, all Canadians play hockey.
Uh-huh.
Even, I'm sure, this author
probably
is mean in the corners with the elbows and the stick. And also, in relation to that same subject, tonight is the night of the Canadian election.
Oh, it is.
Right?
Oh, goodness. So
right.
We might have a new premier in a few hours.
Actually, it's a prime minister, but...
Well, he's the premier...
Leader?
Leader, yeah.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
So in this episode, we are doing a review of The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. Wah, wah, wah. I don't know what that has to do with anything.
I don't know either.
Okay. So you want to give us a summary, Coco, of what The Testaments is about? And I have a copy of the book right over here for those listeners at home watching on YouTube or streaming it live.
Oh, that's good that you have a copy because I haven't read it. So
Wait.
so I'm gonna thumb through it real fast.
We did not rehearse that part either.
No, actually, I did read it. I bought it for myself as a birthday present when it was released last month. So,
because your boyfriend is a slacker and didn't know that you would want that for your birthday?
Well, because I was ordering a lot of other stuff off Amazon, so I just pre-ordered it, and then it came a week before my birthday.
You didn't get one of the accidental contraband versions, did you?
What? There are contraband versions?
Well, there were versions that came out accidentally. They were released.
Oh, no.
Accidentally to the hounds, and
I
got to read it before anybody else did.
Actually on the release date, so
okay.
I was very sad about that. But
okay.
Anyway, so
tell us about what is this story about by Margaret Atwood, famous Canadian author.
So The Testaments, which just recently won the Booker Prize.
Shared the Booker Prize,
is a follow-up to the 1980s novel The Handmaid's Tale, which I will say right off the top, I have not read that in several years, and we have also not seen the Hulu series based on the book. I understand part of The Testaments is kind of based off events and storylines in the series, so there might be some stuff that we don't necessarily pick up on because we haven't seen the TV show, but I think I read enough reviews and interviews when the book came out to kind of figure out what...
And you're doing a basketball motion there.
I am. I'm like double dribbling with
balancing things. Yes.
So The Testaments, the narrator of The Handmaid's Tale does not appear in The Testaments except for extremely briefly, pretty much at the very end of the book. It's not explicitly named that it's her, but it's her.
Right.
So The Testaments follows three characters... what's her name?
Lydia.
Aunt Lydia, yes. Well known to readers of the book and viewers of the TV show, as well as a teenage Canadian girl who turns out to have a connection to Gilead, and another teen girl who was raised under the Gileadian regime. And their stories all do intertwine at the end, but in the beginning... They're just kind of narrating their own separate experiences. Yep. And then they all come together in the end to facilitate the potential overthrow of the Gileadian regime.
So what happens at the end is they get in a boat and they go sailing the ocean blue, and they get into a shipwreck, and then they're on the island by themselves. And it's like Gilligan's Island.
Oh, yeah. So I guess Aunt Lydia would be the professor.
That's the opposite of a spoiler.
So because I have not seen the TV show, I only remembered Aunt Lydia from the original Handmaid's Tale. She would have been what
She's like an authoritarian
I
figure,
would have
right?
termed her a true believer in the original book, but this book casts doubt on that.
Mm-hmm. Casts a lot of doubt on
Casts
that.
a lot of doubt on that. That's basically proven to be not the case, as a matter of fact. I don't necessarily want to spoil it because I know that Daltz does not appreciate when I spoil things, although...
Well, I don't think the listener appreciates that either.
I don't think my cousin in Seattle who listens to us on public transportation, that's your second call out in 2 episodes, Hannah. I appreciate that.
Got to spread the love.
I don't think that Hannah really cares if we spoil things because she's probably already seen and read stuff before we are because she's young and hip and we are neither. So what did you think of the Testaments, Daltz?
Well, you didn't give us your opinion.
Well,
I'm going to go first with my opinion?
Yeah, you're going to go first because I went first with my opinion in our last episode, episode 43, talking about The Laundromat on Netflix. So, Daltz, you get to go first this time.
So I read...
Are you not ready to go first?
No, I'm ready to go first.
Okay.
No, I'm ready to go first. I was just sending an email to my other girlfriend. That's why I was doing it on the side. The Handmaid's Tale I read for the first time 2 years ago.
Wow.
While on a camping trip in Algonquin Park, because I thought that I would need to get away and get some good, solid reading in. And that's when you think outdoorsy, you think The Handmaid's Tale. So I'd heard a lot about it. Obviously, I'd read Atwood before, having been raised in Canada. You couldn't really avoid it. I read one of her books, a number of her books actually, in school, and we had to, and that sort of thing. I'm not really a big Margaret Atwood fan, but the import of The Handmaid's Tale and the fact that I have 2 daughters, I thought that maybe I should read this. I read it. I enjoyed it immensely. I thought The Handmaid's Tale, even though I knew about the hype and it had been 30 years later that I read it.
And the TV show had already come out by then, right? So
right. But I had not seen the TV show. Yeah, because I'm not really a big person into adaptations of books that are longer than the book itself.
And we don't have Hulu anyways.
And we don't have Hulu anyways. So I really enjoyed The Handmaid's Tale. I enjoyed it because it scared me, but it was also one of those like vicarious, like, oh, we were so close, like we were going towards that, and now we're going away from it. And I was relieved to a certain extent because it seemed like it was, especially when it was written in the 80s, it was kind of a fantastic tale and it was a cautionary tale, but it seemed like we were going in the right direction as a society.
And now here we are 30 years later.
So now here we are 30 years later, and I'm reading the Testaments, and I'm thinking, I don't need to read this because I'm living in this.
Exactly.
It was too close to home to me, and I don't want to be an alarmist or an extremist or anything like that. People are not being hung up on walls and things like that. But it just seemed too soon to me, or too close to home. Like I said, it just seemed too real. And it wasn't escapism, whereas the previous book was escapism. It was an educational escapism. It was a vicarious escapism. It was an informative escapism. It was a very creative story. Mm-hmm. But this one, again, I'm not, as listener knows, I'm not a huge fan of sequels because, and maybe this is what a lot of people think that don't like sequels, but you know the characters already, and so you're not. It takes so much more creativity to come up with the characters in the first instance of something. Who are these people? You're getting to know them. You're learning their predispositions and their faults and things like that. So when you go to a sequel, it's like, I already know these people. Now this is not.
Yeah, which is maybe why she didn't put the original narrator in this book, except for 3 lines at the very end.
To her credit, but the idea is still the same. The idea of the society is broken and women are second-class citizens and all that sort of stuff. It's all still there. And so I read it, and it took me a long time to get into it. When I say that, I mean to really absorb it. Sometimes you have to wear the author's shoes for a couple of miles before they fit. How's that?
Love it.
And then once you're in the shoes, they feel comfortable, and you're along, and you're in the characters, and you're in the narration and everything like that. I didn't get into this one for a long time, and I had trouble following the characters because there was 2 characters that were young and one character was older, but the older character and the younger Gilead character, I sometimes confuse them. And this is my own fault because the chapters are introduced with little insignias that indicate who is writing this particular passage. So it's on me there, but I still struggled with it, and I got through the end of it, and the action is all in the, as you told me before, it's all in about the last third of the book, and I got at the other side of it and it's like, yeah, I didn't get anything out of that. I mean, it was interesting. It was well written, as Atwood usually is. A couple of phrases in there that stood out, but yeah, no, I'm not going to read it again.
Oh, okay.
And if there's a third one, probably not going to read that either.
Well, I doubt there's going to be a third one because in the 2 or 3 interviews I read with her, right around the time the book came out, she was very focused on her mortality because she's 70 years old.
Right. And she lost her partner a couple of weeks ago. Too.
Yeah, she very recently lost her partner. She's 70 years old. I honestly don't even know if she would have written this book if it weren't for the success of the TV show.
Right.
I don't know if she necessarily would have revisited this world or wanted to revisit this world.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think a lot of dollar signs were probably involved, a lot of zeros.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very successful pre-sale for this book. So.
Right, exactly. I fall back on this one with the same approach that I had with Go Set a Watchman, which was the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird. Yeah, the Harper Lee's fantastic book, To Kill a Mockingbird. I have not read Go Set a Watchman. I don't think I will because I understand from reading reviews and such like that Atticus Finch's character is a little bit racist, and there's some things that are going on there that are not palatable to me, knowing his character in To Kill a Mockingbird was such an upstanding, solid guy who was doing the right thing and trying to be colorblind when he was working as a lawyer. And so it's the same thing to me, is that I didn't need to read another Handmaid's Tale. And maybe this is Margaret Atwood justifiably taking advantage of the Hulu series and you know, I want some control over how the characters are going to go and where this world is going to go.
She did say in the interviews I read that she was consulted on the series, obviously, and apparently the showrunner wanted to kill off Aunt Lydia, and she was like, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So
this is her way of ensuring that, at least in her world, Aunt Lydia is going to live to a certain extent and carry on the legacy, if you can call it that. So did I ask you what you thought of this book?
You did not know.
What did you think of this book, Coco? What did you think of The Testaments by Margaret Atwood, now that I've been talking for 25 minutes?
You have not, be quiet. So I am unlike you. Margaret Atwood is my favorite author.
Ooh.
Quite probably because I am not Canadian, so I did not have her shoved at me at every turn. I kind of discovered her accidentally in high school. I haven't liked her recent output, however. In the 80s and 90s, I loved her stuff.
What was your favorite Atwood book?
The Blind Assassin.
Oh, okay.
I believe it came out in like 99 or 2000. Yeah, everything she wrote in the 80s and 90s I loved, but then starting with the Mad Adam trilogy,
right.
I didn't love Oryx and Crake. I think there was one thing after that she wrote that I didn't especially love. I didn't even read the last book of the Mad Adam trilogy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so pretty much everything after The Blind Assassin I have not loved of hers at all. But maybe it's because it's revisiting a world that I was familiar with, and I enjoyed The Handmaid's Tale. I actually really liked The Testaments.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah, it was...
That didn't come up in the rehearsal that we had.
Well, I got to keep you guessing.
That's true.
Yeah, our love can't get stale.
I'm glad that you have our love in mind when you're doing the podcast.
Yeah, no, I really liked it. I'm not upset that the narrator from the original Handmaid's Tale wasn't the focus of this book. Right. I thought it was fine without her being in it. Like, I'm glad that they said what happened to her. So we got like a conclusion to her story arc, but I didn't need her to be a more major player in this book. I thought the 3 characters it focused on were enough. Like, their stories were enough. Yeah, I thought I didn't have the problem that you had with like keeping things separate, like
the characters' stories.
Yeah, like that didn't really bother me. There was one part when, because it's not just like, oh, the first third of the book is Aunt Lydia and the second third of the book is this other person, right. And then the third is
intertwined.
Yeah, because it's all intertwined. There was, I think it might have been the Canadian teenager. Something happened to her, And then it ended on a cliffhanger, her chapter, and then it went to like one of the other characters, and I was like, oh no, I gotta know what happens next. So I skipped forward until I could find like the next time
No way.
she was the narrator, and then I like read like, you know, that section where she was the narrator again.
You're breaking all the literary rules.
I know. Well, you know I like spoilers, so
Yeah, you were spoiling it for yourself.
I am. I was totally spoiling it for myself, but not really though, because everything kind of wrapped up at the end.
Right.
I will say I did think it was a little straining of credulity.
Wow.
I know our previous listener who took a shot when we said big words. Take a couple.
I need a subtitle for this. This is what Coco really said.
Now, I will admit that I am middle-aged and I have not lived through any kind of political upheavals or revolutions, so I don't entirely know how these things work. But the May Day resistance in Canada said, we're going to throw a 16-year-old teenager into Gilead and hope that she...
The fate of a nation rests on her shoulders.
Right, exactly. Hopefully she makes it out with, you know, this information that can topple that regime. And I'm like, is that really realistic?
Well, and also considering the character as she was drawn to that point.
Was not really ready for it.
It was not reliable.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I don't know if that's because...
And she was a 16-year-old teenager, or like a girl.
Yeah, and she was a 16-year-old girl who had just actually undergone major trauma in her life, losing her parents.
Right.
So perhaps she was even more psychologically fragile. But
was that the wisest move, Canadians?
Right. Like, I understand that younger people tend to be more idealistic and less realistic of how things can potentially go wrong in terms of...
Well, I think there is a passage about that too, when she describes the reason that they do a lot of the recruiting of the younger people is because they have that sort of assertion, that power of character, and they also have less of a sense of their mortality.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say by using big words. So that part I didn't necessarily, as I said, being somebody who has
haven't been through a revolution.
Who hasn't worked with resistance organizations. I don't know necessarily how realistic that was. I understand that had to happen for the plot.
Right.
But otherwise, that was the only really major thing that I was like, really? You know, but I, even though, like, all the action really took place in the last 100 pages, but before that, I wasn't bored. Like, even though it was all, like, really expository, I was still interested. Like, because I was a fan of the first book, I was really interested to see how the story continued. Like, maybe if I didn't have that background, I wouldn't have been, but... I thought it was interesting. And then it felt like suddenly, like with 100 pages to go, like boom, everything came together. And now it's like, oh my God, they're on a boat and they're sinking and she's got sepsis and somebody is drowning herself. And like, like the last 100 pages was really, really action packed. And I like really appreciated that, but I didn't not appreciate the part that came before that where they were setting it up, you know.
It took a while for them to get to that for me. Yeah. It took a lot longer. I don't remember the Handmaid's Tale being structured that way. I remember it being a little bit more
urgent,
thrilling along the way, you know, sprinkled along the way. And maybe that's again because it was the new ideas were bringing. It's like, oh my gosh, there's people strung up on the wall, like this is horrible, and all these things that were scattered in there. Whereas I just had sort of the same. You were getting sort of that same stuff. It wasn't really anything new along the way for the first 2/3 of the book to me. But then that last third, it was thrilling, but it was also like, I wonder if somebody got to her and was like, you need to make this more thrilling.
Well, okay. So I said the thing about the 16-year-old maybe not being realistic, but the other thing, and I realized that she's kind of bound by what she wrote back in the 80s. Would Boston really be a place where this would happen? Like, I think Boston would be the last place where this would happen. Like, I think Boston would be like the bastion of, no, we're not going to be overthrown by religious zealots.
Yeah, right.
I understand maybe doing that because you want to show how this big, allegedly liberal city
it could be anywhere kind of
thing.
You know,
it could be anywhere sort of a thing. But I'm like, 30 years later, is this really the place where ladies are going to be walking around in handmaids outfits and, so I didn't necessarily buy that part of it either, but she's bound by what she wrote back in the 80s. So
part of the confusion for me was the two teenagers essentially, and I sometimes conflated them. So I think one of the things that would have worked if Margaret Atwood had it done it this way. So one of them is Canadian. She should have talked like a Canadian.
Oh, geez, with the repression, eh?
Oh, you're not going to make me wear one of those, eh? Oh, jeez. What do you mean I can't go to the hockey game? Like, I think it would have been a little bit better for my mind, because I was expecting her to talk like a Canadian.
Well, maybe...
And dress like a Canadian and act like a Canadian.
I mean, we're in the States, so maybe we got the American edition. And maybe in Canada, like, it's, half in French. And,
right.
Maybe it's in, like, Montreal instead of Toronto.
So when you get the copy in Canada, you flip it over, it's in French.
Right.
Upside down and everything like that.
Le testez-moi, Le testes.
No.
I told you I was going to make a testes joke.
You told me you were going to do that, and the producer X-nayed it during the rehearsal. He says, Coco, whatever you do, don't make the testes joke.
I can't be... I'm like Miley Cyrus. I can't be tamed.
You can't be contained.
There you go.
Yeah. That's true. That's true, listener. It's true. So, recommendation, it sounds like you're all in on how good it was, and you're a good judge of how this fits into the Atwood oeuvre.
Oh, take another shot, listener.
Which I think is French for egg. But, oh no, that's oeuf.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So you're a good judge of where this book fits in there. Where would you say it is in the oeuvre? Would you say, of the ones you've read, is it among the best? Is it the best? Or even compare it to Handmaid's Tale?
Ooh, well, like I said, I haven't read The Handmaid's Tale in quite a while. I'd say, well, the thing about The Handmaid's Tale, like you were saying at the beginning, is that it had the shock value.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking, holy crap, I hope this never happens.
Right.
Like, oh my God, I can't believe
This
how
is
horrific
science
this
fiction.
is. Right. And then now here we are 30 years later, and it's like, well, yeah, I could totally see this happening.
Yeah.
So The Handmaid's Tale had that, and this doesn't.
Right.
So maybe that might be like, I don't think it's as good as The Handmaid's Tale because the storyline isn't as novel, but I was completely entertained. It didn't take me a while to get into it like it took you. I didn't, like, when I sat down to read it, like, I sat down to read it. And I would knock
you banged it out pretty fast.
Yeah, I read it in, like, 4 days. Now those 4 days were spread out over, like, 3 weeks.
Because you got a regular job.
Yeah, because I have, like, 19 different jobs. So it takes me a while to have any free time. But
true, listener. Very true.
It's very true. So I was thoroughly entertained. Like, I would definitely give it a thumbs up for sure.
So, how would you describe it to somebody who doesn't know the world? Because you could read this without reading The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, you totally could.
How would you describe it succinctly?
Oh, don't put me on the spot like that. How would you describe it succinctly?
3 ladies on an adventure in the high seas. No.
Toi, mademoiselle. We got the Canadian edition, eh?
Right. Oh, geez, with the oppression, eh?
Oh, what's with the funny outfits, eh?
Oh, geez.
Is red your color really, eh?
I would say it's a very serious and important story that you must read if you haven't read The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, definitely read The Handmaid's Tale.
I think in my mind it's one or the other. I don't think you need to read both.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, unless you're like super Atwood fan like you are.
If you want to have a wrap up of the storyline and find out what happened to The Handmaid's Tale, like June in The Handmaid's Tale, and also of Fred, which was her Gileadean name, and find out what happened to the Gileadean regime, read the Testaments.
So you could actually just read the Testaments, right? Because it summarizes a little bit of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't recreate it or retell it, but it's woven in the lines there.
Yeah. I mean, it basically assumes that you know what's going on, but you
don't have to.
You don't have to. Like, you could...
Which is kind of brilliant in itself, really. I mean, to be able to tell a story that relies on material for its foundation, and yet you don't have to know that story in order to get everything out of it. Like some stories, like, for example, when I'm talking about the To Kill a Mockingbird prequel, you got to know To Kill a Mockingbird to read that second book, which I think came out just because Harper Lee was dying.
Yeah.
And
people wanted to take advantage
people
of her
took advantage
estate.
of it. That's the way it feels to me, not knowing anything about the inside of that. But this is not the case with this book. I mean, this is very much Margaret Atwood making a strong decision to write this book, obviously. So yeah, it feels like It feels like it could be a good one, like standalone.
Yeah. And I do not think there's going to be a third book at all.
So what do you think would be in that third book?
Oh, maybe...
Without spoiling anything.
Well, now I can't say anything about what I think would be in the third book.
So the Canadian girl recruits all the former Gilead? I
don't know.
Former Gilead people, and they create a hockey team and they go barnstorming across Canada.
That would be awesome. It would be like...
What do they call themselves? The Handmaids? I mean,
yeah.
The Handmaidens?
It'd be like Goon with chicks.
Again, Netflix, Amazon, we have got gold ideas here.
Goon with chicks.
Goon with chicks.
Goon with previously like sexually oppressed women.
I think this has got like Netflix series written all over it.
Sean William Scott, call us. We will make this happen.
I think this is a great idea.
How are people not calling us? We have such good ideas.
I don't know. Well, cocoandalts@gmail.com.
That's right.
Just send the contracts to that email address and we will have our agents field them.
Or you could go to our Facebook page, which is Coco and Daltz, and slide into our DMs.
Right.
And let us know if you want to talk.
Right. And give us some suggestions as to what we should talk about next. We're probably not going to take those suggestions, but you should send them anyway.
Well, we very well could. I mean,
right.
You know, we're open.
Right. We are. We're very receptive. So Testaments, Coco gets that a thumbs up. Testaments, Daltz, not so much.
Oh.
Sort of like a thumb, not necessarily down, but sort of like on the way down.
Like like where Joaquin Phoenix and Gladiator was
right.
before he went up or down. Like
right.
You're just kind of.
But
in the middle.
I'm more sort of like, twitching down with that one.
So you were not entertained.
I was. It always comes back to the Gladiator.
And on that note,
for another week, another episode of
episode 44.
44, the Pronger edition of Coco and Daltz.
Good night, Chris.
I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Daltz.